Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watch You Want. Thanks for logging on. We're looking at the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Compressor Chronograph, 41.5 millimeters in stainless steel. This is a very important modern reference for JLC, and one which I believe will be remembered alongside the great 1959 Memovox Deep Sea and the 1965 to 1969 Polaris dive watch, because in the early 2000s, JLC resurrected the great sports watch tradition that had essentially died out with those references in the 60s and 70s, resurrected the sports watch tradition with the Master Compressors, of which the Chronograph was one of the absolute finest. Not just one of the watches that helped to revive sports watches at La Grande Maison in the Vallée de Joux, it was also the launch platform for JLC's first ever automatic in-house chronograph movement. How exceptional is that? Well, since 1833, JLC has created over 1,400 distinct original in-house calibers. It has been called the watchmaker's watchmaker, building calibers on commission to the highs of the highest in Swiss watchmaking. I mean, the absolute apogee, the Olympus, the peak performers like Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, Vacheron Constantin, Bulgari, Cartier, but it had never built an automatic in-house chronograph movement, and that all changed. They debuted with a bang in this case, designed by the then early 30s Magali Metrailler, a young designer, French-Swiss, who joined when she was actually in her late 20s at JLC. Something of a conservative, hidebound organization. Aesthetically, they were regaining their mojo mechanically during the 1990s, beginning to break back into complications, métier d'art, but it took a youthful young woman coming in from outside the company with a completely fresh vision for sports watches, something the company hadn't built in a generation, to really create a completely blank slate view of a JLC sports watch for the 21st century, and that's what you got with the Master Compressor Chronograph and its siblings in the Master Compressor line. These are already being called future classics on the forums. JLC collectors and collectors of haute de gamme sports watches generally have really taken to these models since they've passed from production, and it's easy to see why. On the wrist, 41.5 millimeters in polished stainless steel. The watch is quite comfortable. I'll say that it looks a lot bigger than it is. 41.5 millimeters is roughly your Omega James Bond Seamaster from the 90s, but whereas that watch looks like a 40 millimeter, although it's 41.5, this one looks 42 or 43. It's the strength of those lugs. They're big, they're pronounced, they have complex curvature, and I own a couple of JLCs with this 146 case. It was used on everything from sports watches in steel to compound complications in platinum, and this case was a success precisely because it has so much wrist presence. It's really got a lot of body and character without carrying a ton of bulk, and that's all down to the strong lugs. When you create an oversized case, you have to pare down the lugs, and the case really becomes more of a cushion case with a 1-to-1 aspect ratio, height to width. That's not what you get here with this Master Compressor Chronograph. It really has a gorgeous top-to-bottom tapering to it, and that's the compound swell of those lugs as they splay out at the ends and then integrate seamlessly into the case flanks along the side. Gives the watch a lot of character, gives it a beautiful aesthetic flow. Also, you can see how the strap, this beautiful JLC vulcanized rubber strap that I'm wearing right here, very comfortable, very supple. It's a semi-conforming design so that it doesn't leave a large gap between the case flank and the end of the strap, but it does pull down quite tight if you have a smaller wrist. My wrist is 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters. As you can see, the fit is ideal. Really, this watch will easily fit a wrist under 6 inches in circumference, but because the case has so much body, and because of these unique compressor crowns, whose function I'll describe in a moment, it really reads as quite large, quite distinctive, with a ton of stance and presence. So even if you have a much larger wrist, this watch will wear well, with a lot of character, a lot of body to it. It doesn't shrink from attention, so to speak. You can recognize this as a Master Compressor from across the room, and a big part of that is this compressor crown system. Now here you can see that it's color-coded. This is what the compressor crown brings to the table. You see the red you're dead, and then with 1/2 turn, and just 1/2 turn, white you're tight. Now I have 10 ATM, 100 meter, 330 foot water resistance. It was that easy. I can do this with sweaty hands, I can do this with gloved hands, I can easily do this on a day when I really don't have time or dry hands to fiddle with the crowns. If I want to quickly open up the chronograph, to start timing something, it's that easy. Closed, open. If I want to wind the watch, I can do so easily. Closed, open. Closed, open. And it's a fantastic chronograph within, but I want to focus on the dial before I focus on the movement beneath it. Now, Miss Metrailler, when she designed this watch, brought a completely fresh, somewhat avant-garde notion of what a sports watch should look like. Highly legible. Rather than having a mobile hand at the hour counter for the chronograph at 9 o'clock, she fixed the index and created a rotating disc for hours 0 through 12. The minutes are ticked off over here at 3 o'clock, and in this case, we do have a small baton hand. There is a date window at 6 o'clock with constant seconds, your small seconds at 6 o'clock, a large white lancet chronograph seconds hand, and broad trapeze hands. All of the indices, the numeral at 12, the numeral at 9, the trapeze hands, beautifully loomed. This is a very easy watch to read during the day. It also has a lot of depth to it because, as you can see at this angle, there is a metallic rehaut with the tachymeter scale and the calibrations of the minutes that sweeps downward from the convex bezel and sapphire onto the dial, and there is a bit of a shift in shade from the metallic of the rehaut to the beautiful lacquer of the dial itself. The watch is very distinctive. It is avant-garde. It was sort of blue sky thinking by conservative JLC standards in the early 2000s, but it's also quite elegant and it's aged very well. You could see the combination of the black rubber, the white metal, the beautiful curved convex bezel, and then that black dial with white indices. It's quite sober, it's quite formal if you want it to be. It'll pair well with dress attire. It's also very sporty with the black, white, and red accents, so it's a classical sports watch in that sense. So this is good for the pool, for the beach, for short sleeves as well as long. A very versatile timepiece. It dresses up beautifully on leather, and that could be calfskin leather for a softer, more supple feel, or full-on formal alligator. This watch is willing to dress up or down per your MO. Now let's get to the movement because that is a highlight here. I want to focus first on the case reverse. Here you can see the geosphere, symbol of the 1958 geophysical scientific event. 1958 was the so-called geophysical year worldwide as declared by the UN and a panel of international scientists. There were a lot of expeditions that year, special research projects to the poles, and this geosphere symbol originated as the symbol of the geophysical year adopted by the great 1958 Jaeger-LeCoultre geophysic scientific sports watch. It has been resurrected as the 1,000 hours control medallion for this Master Compressor Chronograph. The 1,000 hours control is the weeks-long test through which JLC submits all of its watches except the caliber 101 micro caliber. Very demanding, fully cased up, that's the test. Shock, different positions, different temperatures, dynamic winding, tests for power reserve. It's the most demanding in-house chronometry test going, and so JLC commemorates it with a rose gold medallion, and they acknowledge their history, especially their sports watch history, by reviving that geosphere logo. Now the movement itself is the JLC caliber 751, and it's the crown jewel of this watch. 272 pieces, 41 jewels. JLC learned from its participation in some of IWC's sports watch development projects in the 80s and the 90s that its classical 889 and 888 automatic calibers were fine, were thin, were beautifully built and engineered, but they were not sports watch tough. So the 751 drew on a lot of the research that had been done in the early 2000s and late 90s into sports watch movements. Free sprung, the watch also features a hairspring that is laser welded at the stud and the collet. So realistically, unless you totally shatter this watch, it is incredibly resistant to shock-induced damage and timing variations or imprecisions. With a 65-hour power reserve, you can basically put this watch down on Friday. I don't know why you would, but you could. And pick it up on Monday, it'll still be ticking. Automatic winding, it uses the more efficient unidirectional winding system with lubrication-free, sealed-for-life ceramic ball bearings, a system that JLC helped to invent and introduce to the watchmaking industry in the early 2000s. The watch features a classical column wheel and vertical clutch engagement system. I can show you how the column wheel operates. First, I stop the movement, then I reset the movement, then I restart the movement. The column wheel makes that crisp. It gives you that audible report when you click through the function selectors, And with the vertical clutch, which is the engagement mechanism, the column wheel selects, the vertical clutch engages and disengages the system. The vertical clutch means that the watch is going to stop without stagger, reset completely, and start without a jump. It starts and it doesn't jump a second and a half or a second like a horizontal clutch system will. Very refined. If JLC was going to launch their first automatic winding in-house chronograph, they wanted to do it with all the modern refinements, all the toys. Twin barrel mainsprings for consistent torque release throughout the running time of 65 hours. There really is nothing more to say than this is right on par with the best from Patek Philippe, with the best from Rolex, with the best from you name it. Anyone who is accomplished, even Zenith, with the latest variations of the El Primero, this is one of the great chronograph movements of modern times. JLC debuted in this sector with a bang. This is the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Compressor Chronograph, an outstanding, versatile, and historic sports reference, already being discussed as something of a classic, not just within the JLC historic catalog, but among all sports chronograph watches released during the 2000s. I have a feeling that if you're into classical watchmaking, JLC, if you're into future classics, if you want to get a head start on the collector's market of tomorrow, or you just want a fun and fine watch, this Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Compressor Chronograph will be the watch you want.